The overwhelming evidence now that we have in my father's foundations prove that the foundations are as defective as the concrete blocks. And the evidence proves that the narrative created by government, assisted by Donegal County Council and the National Standards Authority of Ireland when they created IS 465, that mica was the problem, certainly warrants a public inquiry.
Welcome to Compass Media. It's Saturday, the 1st of April 2023. There was a phenomenal response to the interview that I did earlier in the week with Cllr Frank McBrearty from Donegal and with Seamus May, the chair of the International Small Business Alliance from Sligo. And they discussed the corruption that is preventing homeowners and businesses from all across Ireland and Northern Ireland from getting redress under the government's current redress scheme. I'm joined now by Cllr McBrearty to discuss this and other issues. You're very welcome, Frank.
Well, thank you, Anna, once again for inviting me onto the show. Actually, I was inundated since we did the show there a few nights ago. It's great to be able to get a platform to be able to explain to people what is actually going on in the defective concrete scandal in Donegal. Because a lot of people don't really understand it because it's so academic.
Frank, you know, you say that you have been contacted by people from all across the country. So what is the solution?
Well, I need to take you back to 2014, Anna, when a presentation was given to us, the elected members of Donegal County Council, which is the councillors. And it was the last meeting of the 5-year term in that council, where a presentation was given that mica was the cause of the problem, which we now know today is not the cause of the problem, because reactive iron sulfate minerals is causing the devastation in all properties in Donegal, and suspected across the border in Derry, Tyrone, and now Fermanagh. So that's where this really all started. And at that meeting, I advised people that the only route that they would get proper financial redress was in the courts, and that is a difficult task to take on. But I have travelled that road, and that's why I've advocated that road from day one, and I still advocate that road today.
Just for our viewers who didn't see our programme earlier in the week, and I will put a link to it in the comment box below. Basically, what you said was that under the current redress scheme, houses that are affected by mica will receive compensation. But the fact of the matter is that mica is not the problem, it's other minerals. And so this effectively locks a lot of people out of redress. Isn't that really, in a nutshell, what you were saying the other night, Frank?
The bottom line is it's not a redress scheme or a financial redress scheme. It's a grant. It's a partial grant. And when you take everything out of it, it's basically a 50% grant. The original grant was a 90-10 scheme, and that's what we were sold. We were told by ministers that they were delivering a 10% scheme, that homeowners would have to put up 10%. That worked out to be a 50% grant scheme that has turned out to be unworkable, which is now going to be replaced, in my opinion, with a worse scheme called the Enhanced Defective Concrete Block Grant Scheme, known as the statutory instrument SI 25, which I believe is unconstitutional, because the government is solely responsible for not ensuring that there was proper oversight and policing of the quarry and concrete industries.
Frank, you said there that the only way to get proper compensation is through the courts. And a lot of people just don't have the money to go to court.
Well, that's why I'm fighting this case, because I'm a homeowner and property owner that is affected by this, and a lot of members of my family are affected by this. And we've decided to take my father's home as the test case for this High Court challenge against the Irish state, not against anybody else, against the Irish state, the Attorney General of Ireland, and the appropriate departments and ministers that are fully responsible for this. Now, in May 2021, my mum and dad, Frank McBrearty Sr. and Rosalind McBrearty, had their home cored. We advised our engineer at the time, Kieran Gallagher, that we were going the High Court route because the size of my dad's house, my mum and dad's house, is too big to enter the scheme, because they wouldn't get the financial redress that is needed to rebuild the property. Now, as everybody else, I was still learning at the time, but I had begun an investigation and research into the whole subject of defective concrete. And the knowledge that I have today has been invaluable to that case. Now, we are now in possession of test results on the foundations as well. But we're the first family in Donegal to have what's called a sulfite attack analysis, which proves, undoubtedly proves, that reactive iron sulfate minerals is the predominant problem, not mica. And that is now shown up in my father's and my mother's foundations. So we now have the full set of scientific evidence results to go ahead and prove a case in the High Court against the Irish state. Now, there's a lot of work involved in that. And I believe that's our safeguard for everybody, that if my dad and mum are successful in taking this case, which has been worked on by our legal team at the minute, Gallagher and Brennan, solicitors in Letterkenny, along with a very good set of junior and senior counsels, which will be hopefully issued in the coming weeks, with a statement of claim hopefully issued before the summer recess. So that's where we are at with my parents' High Court case, which is our test case, because this is unprecedented what we're trying to do.
So, Frank, when do you think that your case will be heard?
Well, Anna, how long is a piece of string when it comes to the courts? Now, my father's currently fighting a flooding case against Donegal County Council for the last 14 years, which has been back and forward in mediation and talks and discussions and etc. It's not an easy thing to do. And as most people who would know me personally knows the battle that we had in the Garda corruption case and how many years it took for that. But I would be confident, because of my father's medical conditions, that we could possibly get the case on sooner rather than later.
Frank, you mentioned earlier the legislation underpinning the current compensation scheme, and you believe that this legislation is unconstitutional. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, we have to look at this now in a new direction. And my opinion is we must start and get on the proper road to justice. And one of those roads, I believe, is taking a judicial review in the public interest. But it's complicated. And myself, my father, and one of my supporters and friends of mine, who's a community activist, who's actually taken a judicial review like we have in the past, we have brought together 12 individuals, and we've been in discussions over the last number of months about possibly taking a judicial review in the public interest against the Irish Defective Concrete Block Guidance Protocol Standard, known as IS 465, and which we believe is fraudulent, and including the statutory instrument SI 25, which is known as the 9010 and Enhanced Defective Concrete Block Grant Schemes, because we feel it's unconstitutional and it's based on IS 465 and mica is the cause of the problem. Now, we have the scientific evidence to prove that mica is not the problem, because you have the peer review studies that have been written for the last number of decades on this whole subject of defective concrete. And today, a few weeks ago, Professor Paul Dunlop, Dr. Andrews Lehman, and some of the other world-leading experts in defective concrete published a new peer-reviewed study on the fact that mica is not causing the problems in Donegal, and four houses from Donegal were tested that proved the reactive iron sulfate minerals is the problem. Now, judicial review, we've instructed my legal team through Cllr and Brennan solicitors to bring about a consultation with senior and junior counsel, and we're just waiting on the date to have that consultation. It has been agreed, but we're just trying to pin down a date to sit down with senior counsel and junior counsel and get the proper advice whether we can take this judicial review. Now, the first thing is we need to find out legally if we can take it in the public interest, because if we can take it in the public interest, it'll be a lot easier.
Frank, you're fighting a battle on many fronts. On the one hand, there is your father's test case, which you're hoping to bring to the High Court, and you're also working on a judicial review. And in my interview with you earlier in the week, you had been suspended from Donegal County Council when you tried to raise the issue of this crumbling concrete scandal. Do you have any update now on that?
There's ongoing issues between me and the council. There's already 2 sets of proceedings in the High Court, but in total, I am dealing with 8 sets of separate proceedings. Some of them that I will be taking myself through my solicitors, and the 2 ongoing ones that Donegal County Council have against me. Now, hopefully next week, my legal team will be seeking relief in the High Court against what I believe is an unlawful decision made by Donegal County Council to suspend me with no pay for 3 months and fine me 10% of my salary for 12 months. Now, no job in Ireland would be able to do that, and because I'm a public representative, I can't go to the Works Relations Commission because I'm employed by the electorate. I'm not employed by Donegal County Council. So the only avenue open to me for relief is in the High Court. But I want to get back to the judicial review. One of the first things we need to find out is it viable to take a judicial review? Secondly, what the cost of that judicial review will be. Now, from my own experience, it'll cost around 15,000 to 20,000 to prepare that judicial review and to put all the reports that we have, to put all the expert witnesses' statements, etc., into the affidavit against the state on what they have produced at the minute and what I describe as the cover-up in Donegal. Once we get that and we sit down with council and we get the proper advice in writing, we hope to hold a public meeting in Donegal where the people of Donegal who are affected by this can come along to that meeting and hear from the 12 of us that the 12 of us who have the legal opinion about taking that judicial review, and the public meeting is to see if we've got the support to take that judicial review in the public interest. Now, it's not going to be easy because you could be left with a massive legal bill if you lost. Like, I give an example. In 2003, my dad took a judicial review against the Morris Tribunal and the Attorney General of Ireland on the legal aid issue at the Morris Tribunal. And we lost that case, and 350,000 euros of costs were awarded against my father. Now, as a result of that, and all the issues was ongoing at the time, we had 67 cases settled against the state, plus a landmark judgment in my father's company case against the Garda Commissioner and the Attorney General. But in 2014, in an appeal to the Supreme Court, the state settled the legal aid case where we weren't liable for costs any longer in that case. So it just wasn't the fact that we lost a judicial review. And my opinion is, if we even did lose the judicial review, I think it'll open the door to another superior court where we will eventually be successful in ensuring that we get rid of the fraudulent defective concrete block standard known as IS 465, and it forces the hand of the government to make the changes to the grant scheme and make it a proper financial redress scheme. Now, I believe when we get our High Court case into the right position, I believe that will force the hand of the government to establish a public inquiry like we did when we were fighting Garda corruption.
As you were talking there, Frank, I was very mindful of the fact that when people take on the state, they can often end up very much on their own. And I'm aware of Enda Craig. He has done amazing work campaigning on this issue of the crumbling concrete. But Enda was involved in a 30-year-long battle with the Irish state that ended up in Europe, where there was a judgment finally made against the Irish government, and they had to amend existing legislation. So, you know, going the legal route is for the long haul, and quite often the people involved may find themselves on the road less travelled, as it were, on their own.
Well, I want to come back to the fact you've now brought Enda into this. Enda is a very knowledgeable man. He's travelled the road. And I want to explain to the listeners that Enda took a judicial review in the public interest in Moville concerning the sewage treatment scheme that Donegal County Council was proposing to put past his house, which was going to flow into the Foyle estuary. Now, based on EU legislation, Enda had gone to the EU Commission, but ended up having to take a judicial review, which he lost. But thankfully, the EU Commission stepped in, and basically that ruling in the judicial review that was awarded against Enda, which could have had huge financial consequences for him, the EU Commission forced the Irish government to disregard that rule. Now, the EU Commission getting involved resulted in Donegal County Council and the state having to implement the EU legislation that they're supposed to abide by. Now, I feel that this case against IS 465 in particular could force the hand of the EU Commission on the fact that the Irish government has allowed manufacturers and quarries to break the following standards: EN 12620 and EN 7713. And the National Standards Authority of Ireland's equivalent to that is SR 16 for aggregates and concrete and SR 325 for concrete. Now, that's where the nuts and bolts of this lies. The fact that we have a fraudulent standard, in my opinion, for defective concrete blocks in Donegal for mica only, when the state should be using the standards that must be adhered to, which I'm just after naming, for testing. Because the concrete blocks and the concrete foundations should be tested under those standards that they're supposed to be made under. Now, the Irish government, due to the fact that there's no proper oversight or policing, which is nothing new in Ireland, is to blame solely for this, because the system has been cheated still today.
To finish up now, Frank, what have you to say to the people that are watching in who are actually seeing their homes crumble around them as we speak?
And get behind the campaign that we're trying to mount against this government, because this is a long road. The word progressive, which has been used by engineers in reports from Petrolab, is how best to describe this scandal. This is a progressive scandal that's going to get worse as time goes on, and the only solution is full demolition, including foundations, if they're not tested. Now, the overwhelming evidence now that we have in my father's foundations prove that the foundations are as defective as the concrete blocks. And the evidence proves that the narrative created by government, assisted by Donegal County Council and the National Standards Authority of Ireland when they created IS 465, that mica was the problem, certainly warrants a public inquiry, an independent judicial public inquiry tribunal. in order that we find out the full truth, and that recommendations and findings findings are made and recommendations out of those findings, not to allow this to ever happen again. Because the first thing that the government should be doing is legislating to regulate this industry and stop it from being an unregulated industry that has caused all these problems. Because we're only seeing the start of this problem. This problem hasn't even manifested yet, because every county in Ireland, I believe, is going to be affected by defective concrete in some way or form going down the road. And the fact that the Irish government has allowed companies to certify products and sold them all over Europe and the UK. And we see that now in Derry, Tyrone and Strabane, where people are now starting to speak out about the problems that they're facing due to the fact that defective concrete blocks were allowed to be sold across the border with certified stamps on them.
I want to thank you very much, Frank, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me here on Compass Media. And to those of you who are watching, I want to thank you also. Compass Media is a news and media platform run by volunteers. We don't take any subscriptions or any advertising revenue. The work is all done voluntarily. We ask you please to share out this video to get it out to a much wider audience, to generate the level of unrest and dissatisfaction with what is happening, and as a gesture of supporting the people who are affected by this terrible scandal. Until we meet again on Compass Media, Bannocht de Arif Cllr.